The younger generations are desperate for this, what we call the soft skills, the power skills. How do I show up better? And how do I relate to people better? And again, when you think coming through the pandemic and being locked at home and now coming into the workforce, there's two real dynamics going on. One is what I just said, and and they haven't had the opportunity to really engage or know how to really build relationships outside of on their phones, that kind of thing. So there's almost a desperation. I'm saying that backed up by data, just reading something from Deloitte this morning.
Leadership Story Talks, where we discuss the practices that engage, motivate, develop, retain, and attract people to businesses. We'll give you principles and tools based on real-world stories to leverage listening and storytelling to become a better leader and management professional. Leadership Story Talks is produced by Narrative, a company that focuses on personal storytelling for business.
Welcome to Leadership Story Talks. I'm Jerome Deroy, CEO of Narrative.
And I'm Julienne Ryan. It's great to be back and talking with you, Jerome, and our guest, Kory.
Yes, very, very happy to be back as well and see you both. And now, before we move on to introducing Kory, I just want to remind our listeners to subscribe to the podcast. Wherever you find your podcasts, leave a review and check out our YouTube channel as well, where this will be posted. And the episode's notes, as well as narrative.com/podcast, where you can find all of our previous episodes. So without further ado, our guest is Kory Kogon. Kory Kogon is FranklinCovey's Vice President of Content Development and a Senior Leadership Consultant. With over 25 years of business expertise from the front line to the executive team, she understands the application of FranklinCovey's world-renowned content within organizations, including the strategy and principles necessary to build great leaders, systems, and winning cultures, and how FranklinCovey's blended learning offerings deliver practical solutions that enable the behavior changes required for transformational results in organizations. She's the co-author of the #4 Wall Street Journal bestseller, The 5 Choices, The Path to Extraordinary Productivity, in addition to a book that she came on the show for earlier this year called Project Management Essentials for the Unofficial Project Manager and Presentation Advantage. So today we're here to talk about something a little different. It's the release of the 2024 course that's based on a book that's going to sound very familiar to many of our listeners, which has been a #1 best-selling business book, I think forever, called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. So Kory, welcome to the show. It's great to have you back.
Oh, it's so great to be back here, and particularly on this topic too. So thank you both, Jerome and Julienne.
Yeah. So, I alluded to this in my intro, but the book, I think, has been out 35 years. Or it's been 35 years since the release of the book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And while that seems, I look at that book as fairly regularly, but what does make it timeless in your view, and why did FranklinCovey sort of decide we should do a course based on this book at this time?
Well, first of all, so thank you for this. Really good question to start. It's almost 40 years now that Stephen wrote the
40
book.
years.
And the course started almost 35 years ago. So
Oh, wow.
it's really is amazing. About 40 million books sold and 2,000 to 3,000 a week in the United States right now. It's been amazing. And over 100 million people have gone through the course over time.
Wow.
So it's amazing. So why? The reason is because the work, first of all, is based on timeless principles. So no matter what is going on, and as Stephen would say, the tougher the environment, the more the principles are relevant. And Stephen also was very clear in saying there's nothing new in what he wrote about. But what he did say was he wrote about them based on, life's principles in a very digestible, accessible way. So it's actually the way he packaged them through the maturity continuum that made it really accessible and doable for people. So
Mm.
that's been sort of the secret sauce, in addition to the fact that these principles are attached to key mindsets that drive behavior and outcomes. So it's sort of this operating system that became foundational for lots of people. When you hear people say, oh my goodness, the 7 Habits really affected my life, it's because they're able to do something with the information in the book and ultimately really bring it to impact through the courses.
Mm. You know, I'm curious about the the people who've gone through this course over the many years that it's been around, and have you all found, I don't know if there's been any data around this, but have you all found any sort of pattern in terms of, you know, why people take the course and what they do they have something in common in terms of roles, positions in the world, or is it more about I want to learn these principles and implement them in my life so that ... and everybody has a different reason?
I think there are a lot of different reasons. First of all, we just recently have, I mean, we have a number of case studies about implementations in people and teams and organizations.
Mm-hmm.
Recently, we did some research with some outside psychometricians that asked leaders about the effect of the 7 Habits on their people, and what came back was that people were that have gone through the 7 Habits were more engaged. They were more interested in mastering their jobs, their roles, and ultimately showed up as better performers. So really interesting data around that. And again, even across generations, I think it's different. I think people are like, I just need to be better. So they start there. I just need to be better and more effective. I don't know where I'm going in my life. Maybe this will help me. There's a lot of different competencies that are involved. And I'll really zero in on really very contemporary. Even this morning, I was reading an article on this. The younger generations are desperate for this, what we call the soft skills, the power skills. How do I show up better? And how do I relate to people better? And again, when you think coming through the pandemic and being locked at home and now coming into the workforce, there's 2 real dynamics going on. One is what I just said, and and they haven't had the opportunity to really engage or know how to really build relationships outside of on their phones, you know, that kind of thing. So there's almost a desperation. I'm saying that backed up by data, just reading something from Deloitte this morning on how they are requiring these kinds of what Stephen calls a private victory. You know, how can I be proactive? How do I, you know, work from an outcome point of view? How do I, in this overwhelmed world that we're in, get anything done? And then from there, moving on to what he called the public victory. How do I become very socially aware of other people? How do I put myself in their shoes and really understand them first? And how do we get to creative collaboration, you know, together? That's foreign to a lot of people. Last thing that I'll say, I won't name the agency, federal agency many years ago, was going through enormous change through an election cycle. So this might feel familiar, you know, to people. And they were really struggling with just, again, it had to do with private, public collaboration, all those kinds of things. And I remember being with them, and we stopped everything because they were so out of their minds, crazed with fear out of what's next in a turbulent time, that we had to come back to the 7 Habits to say, let's just start here and work in our circle of influence, not so much our circle of concern, to really get hold of what's going on, to be able to work through tough times. So that's sort of, to answer your question, a lot of different ways at it, but some real key things there as to why people are either picking up the book or going to these courses to really get to some behavior change in their lives, and then leaders for their teams and organizations.
Great, thank you.
So to everyone listening, they might not have heard this in her bio, but I think Kory's psychic because everything, that was all the questions and themes I had in my head before you went into that very robust, holistic overview that talked about culture and situations and the youth coming up. So you hit it all very gracefully, and I'm impressed without even slipping you a note through the chat. So yes, because there is so much change. We've seen this very uneven job market that a lot of people have been notified and they're going through changes, and people are looking. This book is not a talisman, but it can give an anchor and a foundation and
Mm.
and every conversation we have with clients or coaching sessions, people are talking about relationships. How do I communicate? The onus is on more networking, relationship skills in work, out of work, getting work is so key now. So this is a very, very important to have reminders about the basics and the essence and what to build on. So thank you
Yeah.
for that great overview.
Yeah. No, thanks so much. And you know, that word you just used, Julienne, is one I want to build on for the next question, which is foundational. That's also what came to me in terms of this course and this book. I think, and you've described it beautifully, you know, why people are gravitating towards it and the course itself. And that thing that to me is also foundational, you know, you talked about relationships, Julienne. I think that element of trust, right? That there's a lot of, and maybe that's what was going on in the federal agency as well. It's hard to build trust in environments where there has been a history of mistrust or distrust, or maybe even for oneself, for whatever reason, I'm not quite trusting my gut, or I'm not quite trusting this, or whatever it is. And I know that's a big part of this. And I just wanted to get your perspective on how people can get support in sort of building trusting relationships by either reading the book or going through this course, or whatever else you can tell us.
So trust is everything. I always say, people will say to us, you know, oh, do you have some training on how to have a difficult conversation? We do, but I will always say, listen, don't waste your money yet until you really look at what's the level of trust that you have between you and the other person or whatever, because difficult conversations aren't really that difficult if you have high trust. So if you have low trust, it makes for a really, so you can say, well, say it this way. You can use the techniques, as Stephen would say, but until you get to the root of do you have high trust, it makes interactions difficult. So the idea of, in the 7 habits, the private victory, the public victory, this maturity continuum, moving from a level of dependence to independence. Dependence being, I might show up by accident, victimized. I blame everything, you know, on everybody, you know, and so I work in my circle of concern. Just everything is wrong, everything is bad, it's never my fault kind of thing. And that's not very trustworthy. As we make our way to independence, and we are very proactive, we're making things happen, we're getting things done, we are seen as responsible. We are seen, oh, wow, Jerome makes things happen. I trust him, you know, he's really authentic. And now, once you reach that point, now I've sort of earned the right to work on now my relationships with others. Continuing the story, then if I'm thinking from a attitude of win-win, mutual benefit between us, and the other person feels that, that's a continuation of high trust. So, and people will feel that. And trust is very tangible, but for a lot of people, it's a feeling, right? Well, no, I trust you. So if people want to be seen as credible and be seen as somebody that can be trusted, again, working our way from, did I slip down to dependence? Am I seen as independent? Am I seen as, you know, having somebody with high character, that I'm somebody with high character and responsible, and moving on to social awareness and managing my relationships, which, by the way, I'm sort of naming Daniel Goleman's work around emotional intelligence as well. Self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and relationship management, all of that is about high trust. So I hope I answered that question.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you know, it's something that comes up a lot in our podcast because, you know, we talk about leadership issues and engagement as well as storytelling as a methodology. And because that's where we come from. But it's really interesting to hear that perspective on trust. And I am curious because we do talk a lot about storytelling and tell stories here. You know, what do you see as the role of storytelling in that sort of maturity continuum that you've been describing and that the book describes?
You know, a part of Stephen's magic, and we've continued this from it's his enduring part of his enduring legacy, are the stories that are told that make the point around it. So storytelling is everything. So even and visualization, right? So one of his famous stories from the book, because the opening foundational piece is this idea of self-awareness, and are we able to step back and examine our paradigms, how we see the world and the way we think, examine it. And these are like assumptions, unconscious bias, right? I assume something, and when I become aware of it, I can change it. And
Mm-hmm.
in the book, Stephen tells the story about being on the subway, and this gentleman comes on the train and he's got three kids, and the three kids are running wild. And Stephen is thinking, you know, why doesn't he get a hold of the, you know, he's like, why are you such a bad father? And he finally says to the, you know, to the gentleman, you know, do you think you can get a hold of your kids? And the gentleman just looks at him sadly and said, I hear you, but we just came from the hospital where their mother just passed away.
Mm.
And you can see it just gets, you know, storytelling moves people. And Stephen said, and it just his paradigm got changed in a second. And because he realized his assumption was wrong. So when you step back, so that storytelling is so profound around in the book, that's in the book, is so profound around, wait a minute, when I think something, before I just, you know, open my mouth, let me step back and examine, maybe there's a different reason this is happening here. And so storytelling is everything, that's an example to really burn in some of these principles that move it to action, behavior, to get a different result. So that's an example.
Well, that's
Yeah,
a
thank
great
you.
thing, because when we talk about storytelling, we try to be entertaining when we're telling it, but in our work in this particular areas, it's with purpose. It's to drive an action. And I think your example is wonderful, what you shared from the book, because it showed context. And a lot of times we're projecting and assuming and having our internal dialogue, and the script director is going mad. And sometimes it's not what we're thinking, and we're wrong. So, you know, that's a very artful and timely example of what you just shared there.
Yeah.
I'll just take that a step further. So in the course, we have, I mean, we've invested millions into this new course, as 18 videos. And so to, you know, again, bring it contemporary, we see a woman who has herself, you know, she's in certain situations and it's like she's waiting on a Zoom call and nobody's coming on. And you can see how she's thinking, like, ugh, they probably are just like they always are. And then later you see, oh, my child is screaming, I'm trying to settle it, you know. So you see a very contemporary version of those kinds of things through 18 videos in the new course.
Amazing.
Okay.
That sounds great. And the you know, that point about understanding another person's worldview, you know, can only really happen once you hear their story, and a more fully dimensionalized human emerges, right? And so yeah, it's a wonderful example, and great to also kind of hear the specifics about the course as well. There was one thing I wanted to come back to, because in your description of the kinds of people who are gravitating towards the course and the kinds of issues that you're seeing people are coming to the course for or to address. One of the things that we've been talking about a lot, and I'm assuming at FranklinCovey as well, is the world of AI, right?
Yes.
And you know, for leaders are very preoccupied by, many people are preoccupied by this. And I wonder, you know, what would you say to someone who is sort of navigating or trying to navigate that world of AI is maybe a little bit lost or overwhelmed. Is there a place for that person in the course as well? Is that something you address?
There's do you have a couple of hours? Because this is
Let's do it in 2 minutes.
right. It's a big topic, and there's 3 points. I'm not going to remember all three.
Okay.
One of them is that a lot of people are still terrified about what's AI going to do to me? And so that's one application around how do I take a deep breath, and I'll go back to this space between stimulus and response in habit 1. Let me count to 10 on this. AI isn't going away. How do I work in my circle of influence around it to stop creating this self-fulfilling prophecy of I'm afraid of it, I don't want to deal with it, and ultimately you're going to be out of work because you're not buying in. So how do I just stop being terrified and really just go find out more about it? What can I do to make myself more comfortable? That's number 1. Number 2, with AI, the number, there's a lot of task replacement, but this idea of human capability and AI is a principle now. They have to work together. It's called hybrid intelligence. And so AI does not work well on its own. AI will improve productivity in people by 40% if it's done well. It'll drop productivity by 19% if it's just allowed to, hey, I did this, let me send out that email. You need that human interaction. So we need the collaboration, we need the soft skills to be innovative and collaborative and all of that. Leaders, it's a mandate that they are good at emotional intelligence in today's world. And the interesting thing is a lot of their tasks are getting replaced. So they now have the time to, and again, I know their lives are very busy, but their work needs to be the ability to relate to their humans in this world of hybrid intelligence. And so this becomes more important than ever. Then they set the pace for human or cognitive skills. And the third thing is the younger generations, as I said before, are demanding it. AI users, AI technical people are, in our research, show that it is the top skills that they're asking for are cognitive, social emotional intelligence, because they know they need other human beings to collaborate to get the language models, both the inputs and the outputs of AI. So those are your 3 reasons. As Stephen said, the more change out there, the more the principles and habits become relevant and necessary, almost in desperation, to be able to survive and thrive in the future.
Yeah, no, that's a huge thing. And I love what you just said here, in terms of AI is another, it's a big one, but it's another change, right? And it's a change to have to deal with. And as humans, that's what we do. We're always dealing with change. And so here's another one to deal with. And I think those 3 reasons are great. Thanks for answering that question. I wanted to go back to storytelling a bit, and something that we ask of all of our guests, and we've come to that time now. And I'd love to ask you, Kory, about an experience that has shaped who you are today, still kind of influences you in some way or informs your work.
There's couple of things. I think in my younger life, sort of this idea of being very self-aware. So again, in my prior company, working on a very giant initiative, global initiative, I just sort of barreled through it, even though the CEO was telling me to slow down and think through it. And I didn't. And I just wasn't, he gave me all the signals and I just wasn't, paying attention to that. And I just barreled through, and I paid a large price. And it really taught me about, and I had some victimization that went along with it. So it really taught me, a big lesson in, let me get much more aware of my surroundings, of people that are trying to help me. And I'll tell you, and again, I'm relating it to the 7 habits. So really quick, this was a function of my mother, God rest her soul, because she raised the 3 of us, and my sisters are, executives in New York City. And she raised the 3 of us to, you don't need anybody. You can make all the decisions yourself, and we came into the workplace like that. And it took us a while, an experience like that for me, for all 3 of us to move to interdependence, to allow people in to say, no, collaboration is better. I want to hear what you have to say. And that's sort of what manifested out of that example that I gave you. That really was life-changing. And for me, really started, once I realized what 7 Habits was doing later on, I realized that's what happened in my maturity, was I had to go and do the work to get from independence to interdependence.
Yeah. Yeah. I love it when you can look back on an experience and say, oh my gosh, that is exactly related to those 7 habits, the thing that I'm talking about right now in my life. And also thank you for sharing that, because that self-awareness of yours, to be able to relate that back to how you grew up, the environment in which you grew up, that's not something that necessarily everyone is willing to do, but when you do it, and I'm talking to our listeners here, when you do that kind of deep work of understanding where behaviors come from in your own life, it pays off tremendously. And I think you just gave us a great example there. And it also reminds me, one more comment here, in terms of our own method of storytelling. We don't just ask people to come out of the gate and tell us a story, and then we'll critique it and make it better. That comes more towards the end of it. There's a step in which we always ask people to remember their heritage. Remember your heritage is something we ask, and we have specific exercises around that. But essentially what you just did there reminded me of that, because it's like, yeah, where do I come from? Who are the people that came before me and passed things on to me that maybe I'm not aware of, but it's worth trying to become aware of it, because then you become, you get that transformation that you're talking about in the book and the course. So anyway, so thank you. All that to say, thank you very much. Jules, you were going to say something?
Just to resonate with what you shared, is like we all operate in our own little universes and satellites. The relatives, the throwback ones are not with us, the current situation. So when we do change, sometimes we already been in our head so much of what we think it is going to be, our vision, and we have to visit other people's universes and let them adjust to the ideas, or get some buy-in, or understand the context. I think what happens sometimes is, like yourself, like, we're on a mission, we're on a timeline, we have to get this done. So there's layers of people that are going, I don't know, like, they made a decision, here we go. And then you lose that traction, and you ended up, things start showing up in odd ways in organizations, and people leaving because they didn't invest, that the whole expression of go slow to go fast, comes back and really shows its face in a lot of different ways. And you lose that talent or those insights you could have drawn from. So I you bring that, and it's always good to hear all those little voices, all those committee members that are weighing in. We're in situations and asking, do we need them now, or can we write this a different way?
Yeah. This is all Stephen's work on paradigms, because, and when you think about unconscious bias and assumptions, our brain makes shortcuts, and everything we think is based on who we are, how we were brought up, our schooling, I mean, all of that. So the real magic for maturity is when people become aware of this and are, like I said, are able to step back and reflect. Not everybody can do it, but boy, it's, you make real progress when you can.
Yeah. And what a great, coming back to your answer about AI, what a great incentive to leverage AI as much as possible, so that you free yourself up to do that kind of work, because AI is not going to do that for you. So yeah, well, fantastic. I really think I've certainly taken a lot away from this conversation, and very excited for our listeners to take some of these principles and implement them in their own lives and at work as well. Is there anything, Kory, that you would want to leave our listeners with before we let you go?
Yes, we sort of worked our way up from, habit 1, dependence, up to creative collaboration, habit 6. I just want to make a pitch for habit 7, because I want, my pragmatism. Doing this work, this thinking, it's mental gymnastics. It is really hard. None of this is easy. I mean, you asked for, something that's, affected my work. Every day being a reactive, not to stereotype, I'm originally from New York, I'm very reactive, the first thing that comes out of my mouth, and it's everything I can do at home, I'm pointing toward the living room, and, at work to count to 10 and think about the relationship in front of me. You cannot do it without sharpening the saw. If you are not eating right, mind, body, spirit, heart, the whole person, as Stephen would say, if you are not taking care of yourself, you know what happens at 4 o'clock in the afternoon when you haven't eaten, you're dehydrated, and somebody says something to you and you just let loose. So that's my final thought. Don't forget habit 7 and the fact that this is hard work. So be ready for it.
Yeah, beautiful, and a great message. Yeah. Thank you so much, Julienne. Any other parting words, or have we covered it?
Queen. So yes, and that way we can show up the way we're supposed to be, or could be, in our best way.
More effective.
Starting and that very important guidance at the end.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And thanks for coming back to the show. We really appreciate it. Can't wait to have you again another time, I'm sure, as FranklinCovey has so much material that's really relevant to our audience. And I really thank you for sharing your insights with us all. So now back to our listeners. If you've been inspired by this session, and especially when we were talking about storytelling and remembering where you come from, I think that's one of the aspects of what we do at Narrative that, isn't necessarily obvious, is that you really get a chance to kind of look at yourself and where you come from and why you do what you do, and then come up with a story that reflects who you truly are right now in this moment, so that you can tell authentically. So if that's interesting to you, you can consider enrolling yourself and or your team in our group and one-on-one training programs that focus on finding, crafting, and telling stories. And you can find more information on that at narrative.com, NARATIV.com, to enroll. We're always ready to listen to you. And as always, thanks for listening to this episode and this podcast. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a review on your favorite podcast platform, and remember that we're also on YouTube. All of this drives word of mouth so that more and more people can get the kinds of insights that we got today from Kory. So thanks again for listening, and thank you, Kory. Thanks, Julienne, for being my wonderful co-host one more time.
Thank you.
Cheers,
Thanks.
everyone.
Goodbye, everybody.
For more information on the narrative listening and storytelling method and how it can help your business, go to narrative.com.